territory make a determination that they sign sign a petition and indicate that they want to remonstrate against it, then the annexation was done. If 51% of landowners sign a remonstrance petition, then it will ultimately go to a court of law and be decided in that way. If there is no remonstrance filed, then at the end of that remonstrance period, the annexation ordinance will go into effect. So those were my comments, and then I'll bring up my colleague Nick Kyle. There were some questions that we received that specifically we wanted to address at this public hearing.
Right, and before I read these questions and answers that we received, I do want to make a couple of points about this process. It's been very helpful. Because we hear from the public and we have refined current thinking and the current proposal as we move forward. A couple of things that I want to disclose to you today that are definitive changes that are occurring in the city's plans that aren't yet on the maps and we'll see in the ordinance. Number one is the mayor has decided that any annexation that goes forward will include, in addition to the 3-year delay, a 3-year tax abatement program for all property in the annexation territory. Now, what that means, and it's a maximum abatement that the law allows. Essentially, it is a 4-year phase-in of the city tax rate at 25% a year. So, with a 3-year delay of the effective date, which means it would be effective 2024, spring 2024, assessed spring 2025, as Warren said, and first tax payment date May of 2026. That first year, May of 26, landowners who are subject to property tax would pay 25% of the city's tax rate. And then May of 2027, they would pay 50% of the city's tax rate. May of 2028, they would pay 75% of the city's tax rate. And then they would not be fully taxed until May of 2029. So it essentially phases it in over with the two pieces added together. It's like a 7-year phase, a 3-year delay plus a 4-year phase in of the tax rate. That's one change that has come about. You're also going to see some changes to the territory. There's some territory that hasn't been cut out yet of these maps, but will be cut out on anything that gets introduced before the council. And it mainly pertains to, these are areas that really do not need city services. Everything southwest of this Newcastle Road, this quadrant here, everything southwest of Newcastle Road up until it reaches State Road 28 is going to be cut out of the territory. They will not be in the annexation territory. So there, I don't know, there's 10 or 15 parcels. We continue to look out here around the interstate the extent to which we can exclude any commercial property that doesn't meet our services. We've got contiguity issues. That's a requirement of annexation that things touch. So we're doing our best. But if there's a commercial property that literally we know doesn't need our services, they're not hooked up to water, they're not hooked up to sewer, we don't think they need it, we don't think they're going to need fire, we're looking at, can we carve out some of that, because, like I said, that's not the purpose of this annexation. Those are the two comments I wanted to make. Let me read a couple of emails, one of which had comments that she wanted read today, and she had questions, and then there were some questions that came up, I think, at the last meeting that were presented in writing, and we have right answers too. These are comments from Suzanne Engel Burr. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but they came from her attorney. Since 2014, I've been a supporter of the American Farmland Trust and display their motto, "No farms, no food" on my car. This represents a mission we need to strive to achieve for now and for generations to come. There is something very wrong when the best, most fertile land in the nation is not protected for growing food. Instead, it is used to produce inferior products that people may eat, but lead to major illnesses due to poor nutrition. Our nation is awash in disease caused by poor nutrition. In an area where we are, as the wealthiest nation on earth, the rank health-wise near at the bottom of 100 nations in several areas of health, it is even more important to protect our farms to raise food. That food should ideally be organic, not GMO. A nation that does not protect its farms must import food from other nations. Many of these other nations use pest control products outlawed in the USA, but we import them anyway. This can also create a national security crisis in the future if those nations choose not to sell food to us. I therefore ask you to protect farmland in the Frankfurt area for future generations. My children want to inherit the farm. One has talked about returning to the farm as she loves gardening. Her organic garden is wonderful. Because Clinton County has such rich soil, few people realize how hard people in our area must work to enrich the soil to even have a moderately productive garden. Meanwhile, I, in town, struggle to get good organic produce for its superior nutrition. I am the fourth generation to own this farmland since my great-grandfather came from Ohio. Both my grandmother and father grew up there. My mother returned to the farm after being widowed. Although I delighted in visiting the farm, I lived in South Carolina where my husband taught at the university. My father emphasized as I grew up the need to always keep and protect the farm. My cousin currently farms the land for me. It is important for me and my family that it remain farmland. I therefore am very concerned about your proposed annexation of my property. Questions. 1. The county has a zoning code for farms. I am unaware of the town of Frankfurt County. How do I keep my farm zoned agriculture? And here's the answer. Response. Frankfurt City Code provides that territory upon annexation will retain its zoning classification that it presently has. So even though Frankfurt does not have an agricultural zone for its own zoning, when it annexes, agricultural property retains the county's zoning classification together with all permitted uses. Question 2. If this farm is included in this annexation, how can I be assured in the future that the zoning will not be revoked and taxation will not change thereby? This is something that Lauren alluded to in her comments. Here's the response. This assurance is provided by the Indiana Code, which will be confirmed in the ordinance itself. The Indiana Code provides at 36-4-3-4.1 as follows. Subsection C. This subsection applies only to an annexation ordinance adopted after June 30, 2015. Real property annexed under this chapter, 1, is exempt, and 2, remains exempt from all property tax liability under IC 6-1.1 for municipal purposes, while the property is assessed as agricultural land under the real property assessment rules and guidelines of the Department of Local Government Finance. Subsection D. There may not be a change in the zoning classification of territory annexed under this section without the consent of the owner of the annexed territory. What subsection C means is the property, to the extent it is classified as agricultural land for assessment purposes, will be exempt from the City of Frankfurt municipal tax rate. What subsection D means is that the zoning of your property cannot ever be changed without the consent of the then owner of the property. So Frankfurt cannot, for instance, change the zoning from agricultural to something else, such as residential or industrial, without the landowner's consent. Question 3. This farmland has been in the family now for generations, and my children want it as a farm now and for their children. How can I be assured that the farm will be kept for future generations and not forced to be sold as the result of outrageous amounts of taxes due to rezoning? I don't want this farm paid lower for industry. Answer. See my answer to question 2. It cannot be zoned, it cannot be rezoned without the consent of the owner. If you are currently the owner, that means it cannot be rezoned without your consent. If your children inherit the property, or you or they should decide to sell it to someone else, then it means that it cannot be rezoned without the consent of the new owner. So it cannot be removed, it cannot be rezoned to remove the agricultural use assessment classification, meaning there will not be a tax increase related to rezoning until such time as the then owner of the property wants to do something with the property other than farming. Question 4. As this is farmland, we will want to be we will not want to be attached to city water, sewer, and garbage pickup as per Jefferson's residence. There is no well or septic tank on this property. How can it be assured we will not be assessed for these advantages? Response. There is no assessment for property that is not connected for either water or sanitary sewer. If we are talking about pure agricultural land, then the property produces no sanitary sewage and it has no need for water. If there is some part of the property that does produce the sanitary sewage or require water, the annexation ordinance will provide that the city will not force the connection of any property in the annexation territory that has a functioning septic system and an open well. Trash service is only provided to residential property, and so there is no fee or assessment that is required. That concludes part B. I will do one more and one more. Went to James, what's his last name? Right. Why does the proposed annexation territory stop at the NHK facility? Answer. This particular annexation stops at NHK so that that property can be annexed voluntarily in conjunction with the taking city water and sewer service. Their voluntary annexation will not necessarily have the tax abatement program that we're building into this annexation. Once we include the tax abatement in the annexation ordinance, that's the one that I just described to you moments ago, it must apply equally to all property in the annexation territory. In other words, if we included NHK in this ordinance rather than in the later ordinance, they would have the same maximum abatement program that we proposed by Franklin for this annexation. 2. Was NHK aware of the proposed annexation territory when they decided to build that location? Answer. That would have been an answer, or that would have been a question for Mayor McBarnes, who would have had to have had that conversation. I know that he had been forthright with them that they would be annexed into the city. Whether he sat down and had specific conversations about this particular annexation, I do not know. Given that this annexation does not include them and their annexation would be covered by a separate ordinance, I personally would not have felt it necessary to do. 3. Why does NHK get to opt out of paying city taxes when they're utilizing the water wastewater service infrastructure? Answer, they don't. See my response to question number 1. Those are the comments, questions that we received in writing that asked to be read at this session. We're happy to answer further questions should there be any. If not, we can turn over to the financial piece and we can have the folks from the commission provide some explanation how this will hit from a tax impact standpoint, that property which is not exempt as agriculture. Question? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Michael Bell with Reed Ranch Group. We also have Brooke Chalet here from our office. We're going to be here to answer any questions that there may be regarding property tax bills, increases, and financial impacts from the annexation. So there was a 4-page packet that was at the door whenever we walked in. It gives a brief overview of how property tax bills are calculated. So just going to go over that real quick. How do we calculate property tax bills on the first slide? The basic and simple answer for property tax bill calculation is the net assessed value multiplied by the tax rate divided by 100 equals the property tax bill. However, there are different adjustments along the way that are factored into that calculation that'll end up changing the end result of the property tax bill. Those adjustments are deductions, exemptions, the circuit breaker credit, and the property tax relief credit. So moving on to page 2 of the packet, and then getting back to our property tax bill calculation. We use the net assessed value, but we begin with the gross assessed value. So to get to net assessed value, we start with the gross assessed value, and then we implement the deductions. These deductions are the homestead deductions, mortgage deductions, supplemental deductions, the bedroom over 65, and the blind or disabled deductions. Typically, deductions are only assessed on the 1% properties. And then there are other exemptions for properties, such as not-for-profit or governmentally owned properties. So that'll get us to our net AV, net assessed value. Going to page 3 of the packet. The next aspect of a property tax bill is the circuit breaker credits. So back in 2008, 2009, the state of Indiana implemented what is known as circuit breaker. It caps what a taxpayer can pay on their property tax bill. For 1% properties, which is homestead residential properties, it's a 1% cap on their gross assessed value. The 2% cap would be for agricultural or rental properties, and the 3% cap would be on commercial or industrial properties. So that does the circuit breaker credit. There's also a 65 and over credit. So if you qualify for that, you may get the deduction as well. But your property tax bill will also be capped at a 2% increase over the prior year property taxes. Going into the last page, page 4 of the packet, we give a little example on how we calculate a property tax bill. And our example has $150,000 1% homestead property with deductions, a homestead deduction of $45,000, a mortgage deduction of $3,000, a supplemental deduction of $36,750, which gets us to our net assessed value of $65,250. So we take that net assessed value amount, and we multiply it by the tax rate, divided by 100, to get us a gross tax bill of $2,395. Once we have that gross tax bill, we multiply it by the property tax relief rate that Clayton County has, or the 1% properties, homestead properties. The property tax relief rate is 18.7761% of the property tax bill as a credit on your tax bill. So you pay that in income taxes, and the county gives that credit back on your property tax bill. So after the property tax relief is adjusted into your property tax bill, it leaves us with a tax bill of $1,945. Once we have that tax bill amount, we compare it to what their cap was for the circuit breaker for the 1% property of $150,000 assessed value. So that cap is at $1,500. What we do is we take the lesser of the $1,500 for the property tax bill. In this case, it is the $1,500 cap, which gives us a circuit breaker credit of $445 that the county, city, township, all the overlapping units do not receive of that property tax bill that they tax on. So that's just a brief, quick example summary of how a property tax bill is calculated. There's also different financial impacts. It could possibly be benefits from this annexation. The utility bills, if you're outside the city and inside the city, the difference in the charge rate is 25% surcharge, being outside versus inside. Another impact would be if a taxpayer decides to utilize the trash fee. The city has, my understanding, a lower trash rate than outside the city trash fees, and they also do the recycling. We have those calculations and amounts with us, and we can apply them specifically to you at the end of the meeting if you'd like to come up and ask us what your specific property tax bill might increase or the benefits you might receive. We can do that on a specific basis for your property. So if there's anything else, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding property taxes, financial impact, or any other questions you may have for the rest of us.
When you look at property, you just gave us a, what the increase would be, per $100,000.
For $100,000, I do not know that off the top of my head. If you'd like to come up after the meeting, I can do a quick calculation to give you a rough estimate on what that impact would be.
Will this be calculated on existing or new? Is there a difference between the rates of new build out there versus existing?
So I believe the rate, the only rate increase will be the city's portion. And then it'll be, once the annexation takes effect, it'll be the assessed value at that time of the property tax bill for the following year. So if there's existing property, existing assessed value there, it'll be taxed that following year. I don't think there's gonna be a difference between old and new property.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
a bigger question. The phasing, like new construction. Phasing applies to all property, So, whatever, if the total, if the calculation that you just went through, let's say, for instance, it had a $4,000 tax bill in the first year, then the first, and it's all on, and all, you're not building anything new, it's all existing. Then the first year you would pay taxes, you pay $1,000. The second year you pay taxes, you pay $2,000. The third year you pay taxes, you pay $3,000, and it would be the fourth year, actually it's the seventh year, because it's a 2-year delay for the service. The last year would be the year you pay the full $4,000. And it applies to all property in the annexation territory that is property taxes. And that's also, that's not just real property taxes. If you have personal property that's subject to tax out there too, the phasing applies to personal property taxes.
I have 2 questions. As far as the township goes, they're going to be losing on the tax base. So they're going to be subsidized in any way or all that?
They would be. The only part, and it's a very minor part, that any other unit of government will lose will be, you mentioned the circuit breaker. If you hit the tax rate that you cannot exceed, then all units of government share in whatever that credit is. The township still gets its, full relief and all. They still collect that. The school still collects its full tax rate. The county still collects its full tax rate. If there's, I don't know what other units there may be, if there's a library or whatever.
That was my other questions, like ditch assessments.
All that stays the same. Does not affect those laws.
Any other questions, whether it be for me or anybody up here?
I don't necessarily have a question, I do have is, more consideration. I'm a good enough company, so we only do the state company, I also tentative was on the north side, so we have about 12 acres on one side, about 15 acres on one side, all was starting to commercial development. A lot of it's regulatory, and when it comes to right, it's the several $1 million. Having some sort of stability, predictability, and it's crucial. So when we look at the property, we're really working with the company involved in that. We have 5 accesses on the timing is kind of crucial for us. So we've been working with the county, and we're looking at rerouting kind of about 800 out there, lining our side of the properties and so forth to do this. And this is kind of something that probably we do in a certain something and say, we were looking at a $4 million investment on the south side, and about 5 to 7 on the north side. Understanding, that there's a 7-year phase in, it's still a lot. And so, these are not 5-year payback projects, they're 15, 20. So, being able to understand what the tax rate is going to be. And that's a judgment and build the site in Cook County, Illinois. And for that one, that's a little gun shy on what might be coming down the road. So, just want to make that statement.
Well, and what I would say to you is, perhaps we ought to have a conversation with you about what we're specifically planning. It is so that we can give you the sort of stability that, to the extent we can, that you're looking for, because it is not, our goal of this annexation is not to annex Kyoto. Unfortunately, your property sort of sits in the middle of what the goal is, but our goal, our objective was not to come and annex the property that, where you've got your commercial development already. And so what I would encourage is that you have a dialogue with the city. No ordinance has been introduced yet. But let's have a dialogue, because maybe if we get smart people around the room, we can come to a win-win situation.
I will say both the city and county in this area have been exceptional. There are some locations where that's the case. So whether the city and county are comfortable with the state comes out of
Right, and ultimately what's going on in that interchange is going to be very good for you. No pun intended, right? That's why you bought more property up there, right? So I would encourage you to have that dialogue. Other question? Like I said, we are here. If you want your individual tax calculation, I know you got it in a book. If all you own is agricultural land, and I can tell you right now that the individual tax calculation is 0. But if you would like to see your individual or have specific questions about services, the most extensive services that the city will be providing, water and sewer, and they either have been or are being extended already. But we're happy to chat and stick around and have those conversations.
Let me just follow up by saying that as Lauren mentioned, the city has not yet taken any official action on this. We're still taking a look at the territory for the annexation, have a map to be finalized. No official action will be taken if the fiscal plan has been submitted. We prepared by Reading Financial. That additional notice goes out to all property owners, and a public hearing has been held. And we do have various council committee members available here if you have specific questions, and we'll be able to answer those the following this meeting. We thank you all. I appreciate your attention.
And one word about the notices that will go out. There are 2 types of notices that will go out at the public hearing. Everybody in the annexation territory that is covered by the ordinance that is ultimately introduced will get a notice of the public hearing. It will come in a big thick packet and have a bunch of information that will come to the certified mail. In addition to them, under Indiana law, when you annex up to a right of way, you are required to annex the right of way. And under Indiana law, We are also required to send that notice to property owners that are on the other side of the street of that right of way that they're annexed. So, for instance, I mentioned earlier, there is this Newcastle Road where the property southwest of Newcastle Road is going to be excluded. There are several residences that are abutting that road on the southwest side. They're going to get a notice. They'll get a packet. The packet will show them, what the final territory is that the council is considering. It'll show that they are out. But so you may, even though you're not in the territory, you may get a notice. The two different notices will be very clear to you about why you're getting it. You're getting it because you're a property owner in the annexation territory, or it will say you're getting it because you own property across the street from the annexation territory.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming today. Don't hesitate to stick around to ask questions with anyone that is here. Like you said, there's council members, department heads as well. We're interested in your comments or any concerns that you might have. Thank you.